Okay, hey everybody, what's going on? You are now inside another episode of Pop Issue. I am back in Washington, D.C. today at the Pew Institute, and I'm so excited to be here talking once again with Kim Parker. But today we're going to talk a little bit about some of the research they do into millennials and the youth demographic in light of some comments that were brought up. And I want to ask her, as someone who really specializes in this area, what we can expect going forward in terms of different generations, how we're all relating to each other, where the opportunities are and where the challenges are. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to you now, Kim. This is an area that you know inside and out. I'm asking you about it because, of course, Malcolm Gladwell is essentially an author and a speaker, said not long ago at a recent convention that, younger people, our place is the older generations to teach younger people the value of hierarchy, etc. I address this in a podcast that I do, that, I'm not certain who hierarchy always benefits. It seems to benefit mostly a certain gender, typically certain generations and certain races. And we're seeing a pushback of that from the younger demographic. I'm calling it a redefinition of hierarchy and seeing everyone kind of take a step as being a leader, very leaderful all at the same time. Tell me what some of your research has found and where you think this is all kind of going. Because I think whether you are a millennial or someone younger looking at this, or whether you're trying to relate, it's important to have the right information because things are moving so fast. So tell me what you are finding.
Yeah, so we've been looking at this generation of millennials for a while now and comparing them to other generations. And we have a survey, I think it was 2 years ago, where we asked an old question that we had found that had been asked by maybe a Gallup organization or some other polling organization about whether or not there is a generation gap between older Americans and younger Americans. And back in the 1960s, I think it was 69, sort of at the end of that very tumultuous decade, 75% of the public said there is a generation gap between young and old, that they just don't see things the same way. So we thought, well, I wonder if we ask now what we'll find. Will people still see a generation gap? Certainly they won't see one like they saw in the 1960s. Well, we found 79% saying yes, there was a gap between the generations. And so we wonder, well, what is the gap? So we went back and did more polling, and we asked first, do you think there are conflicts between different groups, rich and poor, old and young? And people don't see conflict between the old and the young, but they do see that there's a gap in perspectives and experiences. And so we asked an open-ended question, well, how do you think the generations differ? And a lot of it was about moral values and lifestyle, and also about work ethic.
This is a big one.
It is. But then, so we asked, well, who do you think sort of has the upper hand on those things? Who's figured this out better? Is it older Americans or younger Americans in terms of morals and work ethic? Everybody agreed that the older Americans really have a better,
Now that is really surprising.
It was surprising.
In light of the fact that we've seen the older Americans, just because of the position that they're in, really responsible for a lot of the economic turmoil that we've seen go down, which then leads to social turmoil. So where do you find that coming from?
Yeah, well, and then the one area where people thought younger people really have a better perspective or a better approach is in kind of the changing racial and ethnic makeup of the country. That's an area where everybody sees young people as sort of being out front and more accepting. And we've seen that in more recent polling that we've done, where we've asked all Americans of all age groups about changes in society, whether it be changes in family structure or more immigrants coming to the country, or more interracial marriage, some of the changes that we've seen. And there are big gaps there between young and old, with young people being much more accepting and less likely to say that these things are bad for society, and older Americans sort of holding on to what was their experience and what they're more comfortable with, and not as willing to sort of embrace the changes that we're seeing in the country.
So what do you think is really the big takeaway potentially from that? Where do we have the biggest advantage, I guess, to be able to work with each other, or what would you say would be the most significant point to kind of look out for? Because this is really, key, I think, because so many young people have been harder hit by unemployment. We're seeing them obviously lead in terms of using digital platforms. Digital is taking over, we're going to have mobile banking, etc. So what should people, younger and older, but particularly younger, be kind of looking out for, knowing that maybe the older generation is looking at these surveys and statistics, maybe making up their minds about them before they even walk in the room. Might not be right, might be.
Right.
What would you kind of say about that as someone who's dealing with it all day?
Well, I think the fact that people don't see conflict between the groups is important, that there's an opportunity for young and old to learn from each other and perhaps work together. And I think also, I just lost my train of thought for a sec. You can edit that out, right? Yeah. Oh, I know what I was going to say. Okay. So we've also done polling about how people feel about the obligations and responsibilities that different generations have to each other. And obviously we've got a population that's aging rapidly, and there's going to be a lot of need within families and within society for caregiving and supporting different generations. And as you mentioned, at the same time, young people have been hit particularly hard in the job market during the recession and having a hard time finding jobs. So we're finding more multi-generational family living is taking place now. A lot of young adults, we call the boomerang generation, moving back in with their parents. So we've asked a series of questions about, what are people obligated to do for their family members? Do adults need to take in their aging parents? Do parents need to pay for their children's college education? And we have found that with millennials, they have a really strong sense of obligation towards the older generations. That they think that they expect that they will have to care for their parents. They think that young people should assist, their aging relatives if they need help with living expenses or that kind of thing. So there's still very strong bonds between generations within families, and I think that this younger generation also has sort of a sense of responsibility and obligation to the older generation in general. So I think that's interesting, and also, sort of bodes well for the future in terms of everybody being able to work together. And
really interesting. Thank you so much for the insight, because I think that this is particularly a generation which seems to be either bashed or like upheld, and I'm sure it's neither one, so I'm going to just continue to speak to experts like yourself. So thank you so much, Kim. Thank you so much for watching, you guys. Definitely tune in for tomorrow's video. Again, this has been Pop Issue, and I'm Lauren DeLisa Coleman for the GlassLGC.com site.